So, you want more aura-based paladins that are not Tesladins? Well, I've got the toasty beast for you, TROGDOR the BURNiNATOR, or more precisely, the Holy Fire Paladin. Like the Tesladin, this build can be made without the high-end gear option simply by dumping into the aura and synergies, but unless you have an Infinity Mercenary to help with resist issues, it's gonna be not as strong as you see in videos. Though, also, like the Tesladin, they can be some of the easiest and laziest characters to farm normal and nightmare without lifting a finger with these cheaper setups, and with the right equipment, they actually can take it into hell. To stick with the theme of Tesladin alternative, we're going with the Zealot base, and intentionally aiming specifically for the fastest, not bugged attack speed with Zeal, and aiming to get as big of a damage aura from equipment as possible, building up its synergy so we can smack the living snot out of anything nearby. So it's your standard Zealot archetype with extra flair, and it plays much the same. There are pros and cons to both TROGDOR as well as the Tesladin, probably the biggest three differences being that the Tesladin leaves an extra slot of your equipment option open, while the BURNiNATOR gets a much larger radius for the aura at the cost of that one slot. And of course, the third difference is the resistance distribution of enemies impacting where you shine with each, though both can literally farm anywhere in the game with the right gear. In terms of stats, they are fairly straightforward. Enough strength for equipment and enough dexterity for maximum block while using Holy Shield, and the rest into vitality. Even without high-end charms, you'll still end up with a fairly reasonable amount of life, and thanks to the build not really needing charms specifically, it lets you focus them on resists and magic find, making farming areas with masses of just little enemies much easier. As far as skills, you would think a Holy Fire Paladin would use, well, Holy Fire, but you'd be wrong. We'll get to that from equipment, like the Tesladin does, kind of with its Holy Shock and Dream. Instead, we focus in on maximizing conviction to counteract the fact that fire is more broadly resisted than lightning. Beyond that, it's all about maximizing that Holy Fire synergy with resist fire and salvation, boosting Holy Fire damage from your equipment by 480%. And then we just invest in a slightly different skew of the Zealot loadout, instead putting 20 points into Holy Shield and the remainder into Zeal. This is due to our high level conviction removing the need for attack rating boosts for the most part against bosses, and our weapon removing the need for it against normal enemies. In fact, you could even go just enough Zeal for max swings and then put the rest into sacrifice for even more physical damage, unless you're being lazy and kind of like I did, and didn't feel like respecking off another build setup like I did here. In terms of Mercenary for this one, since we actually have an okay physical damage boost from our weapon, I stuck with my old Might Mercenary and gave him a Reaper's Toll for that Decrepify proc for dealing with enemies that might end up with physical and fire immune duos, and potentially beyond my conviction breaking ability, because, well, it won't break everything. And as far as armor and helmet, it's the same as usual: resist, leech, and if you can grab it, attack speed. And as long as your resists are fine on him, you don't have much to worry about. Though in our own equipment, this actually changes quite a bit from what you'd expect, since for the BURNiNATOR, you actually need 3 pieces of very expensive equipment instead of the Tesladin's 2 pieces of equally expensive equipment. And that's because we can and need to get a higher level Holy Fire to make this work. In this case, the grand total of level 44 Holy Fire, with the first piece bringing it, well, being Hand of Justice with 16 levels. This weapon actually works really well on this for a few reasons. The minus enemy fire resist helps the fire damage, the blind, freeze, and ignore target, keeping our survivability up extremely high because it shuts down enemies, and plenty of other good mods. And it is worth noting that that minus fire resist on the weapon actually comes into play after conviction, so if you break their immunity, that is in full effect. If you don't break their immunity, it does nothing. The other 2 parts that are the heart of TROGDOR are the Dragon Armor and Shield, each providing an additional 14 levels of natural Holy Fire, some of the nice stat perks, and some pretty reliable sources of venom. The only drawback is also a bit of a boon, despite its annoyances, and that is the Hydra cast, which, while fun and quirky on a bow, can sometimes be irritating on melee whenever it stalls your plans for a few seconds when triggered near the end of a Zeal cycle. Though if it triggers at the beginning of a Zeal cycle, it's not a big deal because, well, you won't be as locked out as long. And that's the majority of our damage, though to hit max frame rate with the Phase Blade version of this, or at least max frame rate without exploiting the bug, we still need 40% more attack speed, or a source of fanaticism. And since we're running conviction, I chose the former, starting with Lava Gout, mainly because, as we've mentioned in other videos, I don't care about toting around a demon limb for higher enchant. You could also get an increased attack speed gloves, like of a wide variety here, Whether they're crafted blood gloves, laying of hands, or even just a random set of rares with attack speed and resist, it would be fine. I just choose this one for a little bit of attack rating and a little bit of extra fire damage. The other source of attack speed is our amulet with High Lord's Wrath. While not really essential for anything, it does give us Deadly Strike plus skills and, well, for our Conviction and Holy Shield at least, and the desired 20% increased attack speed. Everything else here is just icing on the cake, and it works really well for this particular build because we are actually doing some okay physical damage despite using a phase blade. The last big key thing that I would definitely mention by name is Ravenfrost, since we don't have Cannot Be Frozen elsewhere. This makes life so much easier on any melee character since it keeps you from swinging at a snail's pace anytime there's cold damage, and it also gives you a good amount of useful boosts, the dexterity, attack rating, and all that kind of stuff. It's totally worth packing around on pretty much any melee character. Beyond those things, it's a lot of personal choice. I went with my dual leech ring that I use on darn near every physical character, as well as my token Gore Rider boots that I put on, well, everything. I love those boots. Though you could do anything from War Travelers for Magic Find to Goblin Toe for bigger crushing blow, or even Inferno Stride to make your burninating even more entertainingly visual with Blaze. In the helmet slot, I actually have something I would not really recommend, and that is because I have a rare helmet I was using for another test project that may or may not be made into a video. It's having mixed success, because I felt like hoarding the rest of my fire rainbow facets rather than burning them in a custom Griswold's helm just for this build. Good normal helmet choices for this one would be things like, well, the Griswolds we just mentioned with rainbow facets. Another one would be Guillaume's for crushing blow, Vampire's Gaze for damage reduction and leech, or even a Dream helmet. If you skirt some of your Zeal and Holy Shield points into resist lightning for synergies, you can actually have that extra second element there. Lastly, on the belt, I just went with String of Ears because I wanted to avoid anything super fiddly or weird that we could do with some other belts, but a good rare resist belt would serve just as well, though I do really like the damage reduction here, though we could get that from Verdungos if we really wanted to, and we could get plenty of leech elsewhere. As far as the charms, since plus skills won't do squat for us, we pretty much focused our charms on resist and magic find because, hey, maybe I'll find enough rainbow fire facets to use them in Griswolds for this build? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Anyway, while this build does go a bit slower than the Tesladin, it can do pretty much the same thing and is a great farmer for areas with tons of swarming enemies like cows or flayers, since it can pop them fairly quickly in a larger radius as you just walk around, and it's fairly low risk just like the Tesladin, thanks to being a proper Paladin Zealot, which is tanky as sin. Which means you can also just tank it anywhere it pleases in the game. Beyond that, even Chaos Sanctuary with this build if you really want. We did it ourselves, with the fire just making some things easier and the plenty of physical damage making everything else possible. Is there another aura-based build you'd like to see, or maybe something more exotic? Mention it down below and I'll see what I can do, since these weird, not quite meta but still fun builds are what makes this game entertaining for me as well. Also, would you like to see your build tested or reviewed on the channel? Feel free to link your max roll build down below. It may get featured on the channel. And as always, special thanks to the channel members, patrons, and viewers that make this content possible.